Hey guys, this is Chuck Pressburg with Press Check Training Consultant. Based on your guys' feedback from Instagram and YouTube, sounds like you guys want me to do a video, talk a little bit about some of the communication setups that I used when I was still active duty. A lot of you guys have questions about the radio that's sitting in front of me, the Triumph Instrument PRC 148 MBITR clone. This was a radio that was basically designed by the Chinese that uses actual working high-quality radio components inside of it, and then it's put into a ruggedized, hardened, waterproof casing that represents or replicates the Tally's 148 or Jim or MBITR 2. So I've only had this radio about 48 hours, and I haven't really taken it out and done very much to it. So I am going to talk about the Triumph Instrument device specifically, but I'm touching on it very, very briefly. More of this is going to be discussing my experiences with the actual 148, and then all of the accessories that you guys see on the table. I've got my plate carrier that was set up from when I was on active duty. And going to talk about what antennas I used, when, what bandwidth I used, when, how I had my antenna set up, how I had my push-to-talk set up, what headsets I used, all of that stuff. So this is going to be more of a historical perspective about the real deal, or if you're a milsim guy, the real steel antennas, push-to-talks, and headsets that are on the table, and less about this clone radio that's in front of me. So without further ado, gonna let you guys know this is gonna be a 2, maybe a 3-part video, depending on the duration, how long I talk about each thing or whatever. Generally, I'm gonna discuss the radio features, a little bit of the history of the MBITR, and stuff like that first. In that first video, probably gonna go into antennas and waveforms. And then a second video behind that one that I do immediately following is going to be push-to-talk setup, push-to-talk lengths, types, pins, and headset/earpieces, along with some of the setup as far as how you set it up on your kit. Now, I am going to do a little bit of back and forth, because when I talk about antennas, I got to talk about remoting versus direct attachment, and that also pertains to the physical placement of the radio on your gear and where you're at, grounding out your antenna, line of sight to your thing, all that stuff. It all comes into play. So I highly suggest that you guys watch both part 1 and part 2, and screw it, if there's a part 3, watch that too. Don't just come in here and cherry pick, oh, I only care about this, Davies headset right here because I'm a milsim guy and this is all I care about. Like, dude, expand your horizons a little bit. Put up with me running my suck. I promise you're going to be better educated for it coming out of the backside. All right, so without further ado, let's talk about the 148. 148 was a SOCOM programmer record designed to replace the 126, 127, Sabre series, MX300 series, all of the various commercial off-the-shelf and military handheld radios that were being used by elements of the United States Special Operations Command in all of its various branches at that time. So this was a big SOCOM Tampa program. Radios got fielded in late 90s, and yeah, they started doing beta testing, getting fielded in your 98, 99 time frame. By the time I got back into the Rangers in 2000, the MBITRs were already there. So, but they had been there for less than a year, I believe. So the MBITR radio replaced the 126 radio in the 75th Ranger Regiment, and they were issued down to the squad leader level. So squad leaders had, each of the 4 squad leaders had one, and then the platoon leader, platoon sergeant carried 1 or 2, depending on availability and use of other radios. So the radio was set to your platoon frequency, and basically, and you'll see this when we talk about antennas and other things, however an element used the radio that this replaced is how they used this radio, even though this radio was much more capable. So, for example, the PRC-126 squad radio, which was used by the entire United States Army throughout the 80s and 90s. The 126 radio is a VHF low band, which in the military we call Fox mic or FM. So it runs from 30 up to 85 megahertz. That's its bandwidth there, its frequency range. And that is a designated military frequency band that, regular radios in the United States are not legally allowed to operate in. It's designed for ground applications, that specific wavelength, and different wavelengths penetrate through certain things, have better performance line of sight, can transmit further on lower power without interference. There's positives and negatives to all of these waveforms. But the one that the Army had, going, all the way back, as far as I can remember, before I was in the Prick 25 and non, replaced by the Prick 77, the Singars radios, the 119 series, and then the ASIP Singars, the 119 Echo and Foxtrot models, they're all 30 to 85. That's it. That's what you get. 30 to 85 use a specific antenna. And so if you're a Ranger that's used to operating in 30 to 85, and they give you a radio, your default setting is, I'm going to run it in 30 to 85. Fortunately for the Rangers, they were also replacing the Motorola Sabre radios, which operated in a VHF band that was higher in the frequency. So you're in the 130s to 170s in that freak band. We called it MX. That's the MX freak band. And we never actually knew what the specific frequencies were, because the Motorola radios were programmed using an alphanumeric channel ID. So you had A channel, B through up like Foxtrot Golf, and then the radios had a dial on the top that went like 12 channels. So across a command or task force, those radios would be programmed so that Foxtrot 12 was the same 174.645892, whatever the heck. So the end user really had no idea. And that was good in an insular fashion, because it was very easy to be like, all right, hey, meet me on Delta 12, meet me on Echo 5 or whatever. That was all cool, fun of the game. But if you had somebody come in from an outside entity and they had some of the older Motorola's that were actually loaded by a computer, and they didn't even have this screen right here, there was nothing. You had to sync it with a computer and load the frequencies in via laptop interface. So they might be able to switch to Fox 12 or whatever, but there's no way for them to tell what Fox 12 is. So if they were loaded and their channels didn't match up, there was no way that you could physically go into the radio and be like, dude, I'm on 174.9521, whatever. So some of these radios were used in military FM VHF low band. Some of these radios were used in the VHF high band. And then the Air Force cats, they were running your 112, PRC 112 survival radios. They were running some of their other UHF radios, which we called AM. We were running those AM radios, which was a misnomer. They weren't actually, whatever. Those radios were had big fat, we called them donkey dick antennas on top, and those radios were primarily used for line of sight to aircraft. They did not penetrate through. Sorry about that. They did not penetrate through foliage and stuff as well, but they transmitted on a long waveform for a very, very, very far distance. So MBITR 148 filled all of those roles. Now, back then, there was not a whole lot of what we call multi-band antennas. If you understand anything about antenna theory and wave propagation, these different waveforms that I'm talking about, and I'm totally not trying to nerd out and discuss things that, frankly, I am ignorant amateur end user. It was not my job to prove out antenna theory based on the terrain of the operational area, whatever. Like, there was communications people that was their job, was to understand antenna theory and how this electromagnetic spectrum interfaced with planet Earth. And they were able to advise us on, we believe we should be using this frequency band for this region for these reasons. Me, as an end user, I need to be smart enough to know, all right, VHF low band, a la Fox mic FM, it needs blade antenna. This is the antenna that was issued for the MBITR radio when operating in that VHF low band or FM range. So very long, flat radiating element inside of that thing. So I needed to know, if I see a frequency that says 55.75 on it, I had to be smart enough as an end user, without having to go to my commo guy, that 55.75 was a VHF low band a la Fox mic freak, and that this is the antenna I need to put on my radio. So the original MBITR came with 3 antennas. It came with a long whip antenna like this, which is actually a short whip antenna if you're talking about man packs. It came with a small VHF, 130 something to 170 something antenna, and this is what you would use if you were operating the same frequency range or talking to those Motorola 300, Motorola Sabre R style rechargeable, what we called assault or SOCOM radios back in the day, because the Rangers were both a conventional light infantry unit and a special operations supporting element as well. So the Sabres would come out when we were doing special operations type stuff, but they would not get used for our multi-day continuous operations out in the woods. They were too loud. They made noises. They beeped when you talked. All that ninja patrolling Vietnam stuff was still very prevalent in the Ranger battalions, even in the early 90s. So the noise and light discipline, the police lapel mics that law enforcement used, none of that was really a good interface for dismounted patrolling in the woods. So the 126 with the H250 dog bone was the radio of choice for that. But when we were doing special operations stuff, this was the antenna that we would use to talk to the old Sabre R radios. All right, 130 something to, let me get more precise, 136 to 174. This is a newer version of this older one. So I don't even think these are issued anymore. I was actually having trouble finding info about this on the internet. This is its replacement. This is that dedicated VHF high band radio. This is not a multi-band. It is optimized for that waveform. And all of the original radios for the 148, they all were tuned specifically for those 3 main bands: the VHF low, the VHF high, and finally the UHF, which I don't have. I don't have a UHF on the table, one of the original UHFs. They were diameter-wise almost as fat as this multi-band antenna here. They were a little bit more rigid, and they came straight up. And they're about this long. And that is what you would see on a combat controller or a JTAX radio for his ability to talk line of sight in that, over 220 to 512, 200 to 512, whatever band, or that higher end of that UHF spectrum. So 3 main antennas came with the 148. Whip antenna for VHF low. The green tip, which I call, where'd my green tip go? Oh, here it is. The green tip antenna, which, like I said, we all called the MX antenna. I like to call it the clit beater, because this thing is like really, really flimsy, and I could be like, take that, girl, take that, take that. What's your name is? Bark like a dog. No, I'm just kidding. So Sorry, I don't have a UHF only antenna on the table here for you guys, but you're picking up the picture. Now, after the war started and the Harris 152 came out, we had a slew of antennas from multiple manufacturers that were all kind of tweaked, and everybody was looking for that optimal multi-band. So the ability to, because the radio can do it, the ability to switch from one frequency range to another. Hey, I'm talking to ground guys, and this is the primary waveform I need to be using. Oh crap, I need to talk directly to a Black Hawk medevac helicopter or a gunship right now, and they are operating on a VHF line-of-sight freak that is out of that SINCAR's 30 to 85 range. So I either have to have a second radio with a different antenna on it, I have to switch antennas, or if I have a multi-band antenna, I just switch the channel on the top of the radio. And as soon as I switch from channel 1 over to channel whatever, it's automatically changing the frequency waveform inside of the radio and said, oh man, he's on channel 4. Channel 4 preset, that is a UHF channel. It's operating at 16K and it's pushing this many watts of power. The 148 was capable of memorizing all of that information. So, we will go ahead. I've been talking for 16 minutes now. We will go ahead and stop here. No, we're not. I'll go ahead and talk a little bit more about multi-band before we take a break. So these multi-band antennas, they, and here's one right here, they are all trying to fight the battle of form factor because nobody wants a big antenna on their radio. They want form factor, and they also want that broadcasting range, and they want it to be decent. So obviously, if we know that the VHF low band likes this blade style antenna, and the longer the freaking better, you can't turn it into a round antenna and shrink it and have it work as good. If I plug both of these antennas in to two separate radios that are both transmitting at 10 watts, I'm going to get so much more distance off of this dedicated antenna here than I am out of this multi-band antenna here. So much more distance. So everything is about no free lunch and trying to split the difference. And there's a lot of good multi-band antennas out here. I will tell you though, if you're going to be anywhere near that VHF low band, the multi-band antennas that are of a flat blade design, in my opinion, have worked better. There's one that's about 20 inches long that is labeled 30 to 512. So the full spectrum. It's made by Harris. It's a 152 surrogate. And that multi-band antenna is probably one of the best that I've had. There's one, I don't know the manufacturer, again, very similar in design. Flat blade type, but 20 inches long, called a Shakespeare. And Shakespeare, I got it from an Air Force guy. So I have no idea what company makes it or whatever. Should have done my internet research. Shakespeare, bar none, the best multi-band antenna that I've come across with that Harris 30 to 512 right behind it. Those two radio antennas were awesome in my experience operating downrange or whatever. So before we cut off and quit talking about antennas for a second, talk about other stuff, let me talk to you guys about flat blade antennas and how to carry them and how to not break them. All right. First off, these antennas are designed to be folded, right? But every time you fold that antenna, you are essentially cutting the range of your radio in half. Allegedly, according to the communications guys that are smarter than I. Also, inside of these antennas, you can hear them clicky, 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 clicky. All right, inside of these antenna, and this thing is insulated, wrapped in rubber to keep you from grounding it out with your sweaty, wet, soaking wet body. If you have, and I'm talking to you big Army people, if you have antenna that have the rubber removed off of it and the metal radiating element is exposed and you touch that, you're grounding your antenna out. So along these fold areas where the antenna is normally folded, this is where you will see old tired ass blade antennas get their rubber ripped off. Bad, 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 bad. Don't do that. Get rid of that thing. All right, and then finally, and it's hard to tell, so I will frequently mark these as soon as I get them. So sometimes it's hard to tell which way is the folding end on these antennas, the folding direction. And you're like, well, Chuck, what do you mean folding direction? It went that way and it went that way. Yes, technically it did, but on the inside, it was not happy about that. So what I do, and I'll show it to you when I show you the other blade antenna that's on the kit. I will take a Sharpie, and when I get these things brand new out of the package, whichever way they're folded, I will Sharpie index the inside of the antenna folds so that I know that that is the inside. Why is that important? Because there are multiple pieces of metal, and they are riveted together in here. They lay on each other in strips, okay? And they look, if you look from the tip of the antenna down the antenna, they look like this. And I'm exaggerating the U because obviously they look flat to you, all right? So they're more like that, all right? Let me get this proper camera angle. Okay, they look like that. So when you fold them, they are easier to fold this direction than they are trying to fold the U backwards. All right. So you can obviously see it would be easier for me to do that than to flip it around and do that. All right. You see it gets more fucked up when you do it that way, right? Well, that's what's going on inside of your antenna in here. So if you keep bending it backwards, it's going to get limp dick, all right? And you do not want a whip antenna that cannot maintain an erection. When you unsecure this thing and let it fly, all right, it's time to fly the black flag and get some fringe comms sorted out. You want this antenna to maintain its 3-foot long, rigid, I didn't say black and rigid, you fucking racists, rigid appearance, right? So that's what you need. But if you have 80-second privates that have been bending it this way, bending it this way, bending it this way, bending it this way, bending it 5 times and then rubber banding it down, it's going to end up getting muscle memory at these joints, and it's going to just hang down like a limp dick dog. All right, and it's not going to give you the height that you need for your better line of sight. That's one of the reasons why these whips are good. They're getting the radiating element higher above you and away from your body to punch that RF energy out towards your receiving station. All right, so that radio folded once, or that antenna, folded once and secured with this Velcro tab here. This is going to have more operating range. Come on, Velcro. Work with me. It's going to have more operating range like this, okay, than it will in the configuration that it came in the package, which is like this. All right, you basically had the radiating element coming out of the package. You have the radiating element folded in thirds. So this is going to give you less operational range. The radio is just not going to push as far with the RF energy that you're pumping out when it is when it's folded like this, and you're not going to hear weak ass RF energy that's coming through, over the hills and through the woods from grandmother's house back to your station. You're just not going to hear it. You're not going to hear that shit the more times this thing is folded. And that's why squad leaders from the 82nd Airborne Division, squad leaders from the 82nd Airborne Division are better than that. Squad leaders from Fort Hood. That's why squad leaders from Fort Hood that roll up to me and are like, check out my embedder, man. When I see them walk up to me at some type of joint organizational brief talking about convoy brief or whatever, and I see this wrapped in a rubber band, I want to prison shank them right there on the spot, because they're damaging the antenna by doing this, and they've cut their range or throw of that VHF low band Fox mic. They've cut it down by kilometers on an order of magnitude. Oh yeah, look at that, straight and rigid. Okay, so hope I beat up the old VHF low band antenna. Take care of your equipment, it'll take care of you. Obviously, these multi-band antennas, much shorter, much easier to deal with when they're attached directly to the radio, but not going to work as good for as far distances. So if it's an assault net and you know that you're going to be assaulting, you're going to be going in, conducting some MOUT, military operation urban terrain, fishing, fighting in someone's house, CQB, close quarter battle, whatever you want to call it. If you're going in to a neighborhood to kick down doors and potentially shoot people in the face, these shorter antennas are going to they're going to stay out of the way as you're interfacing with your equipment, going for magazines, slings, around your rifle, all these things, right? So they're just better. If you know that your radio is essentially a gigantic soldier's intercom, if you are, a overpaid private and you're part of a posse going out to do, work, you really don't need to talk any further than your team leader. And primarily, this thing is an SA tool anyway, situation awareness tool, right? You just hanging out, listening to what's going on the battlefield. When you're low man on the totem pole, nobody expects to hear from you. Just do your job. Way too many people talk on the radio that don't need to be talking on the radio. Go find somebody, look at them face to face, and be like, hey, I think I found an underground passageway, or whatever. Okay? So, people ask me, why do you like the 148 more than the 152? Why do you do this? Why do you do that? You guys have to look at this from my perspective. That is platoon level combat operations where the people that I am talking to 90% of the time with this radio are within my tribe. I do want the ability, in extremis, in a hurry, in an emergency, to talk outside of my tribe. But my radio is primarily going to be configured optimally to talk within my tribe. Now, if I'm out doing recon and I'm trying to use a small handheld as a weight savings for what I essentially should be using a man-pack radio for, then obviously my bandwidth, antenna selection, all these things, it's all going to change. But for a small radio that goes on my kit for the purpose of talking to my mates, I like the 148 over the 152 because of the smaller form factor and the fact that it integrates easier with Big Army stuff, or it did back in the day. The Big Army's got 152s now as well. But it's a very, very easy radio to use, and I have a lot of experience with it, and it just seems like there's less stuff to go wrong with this radio than there is with the 152. But I could just be one of those old parochial guys, and, somebody could come back in the comments and be like, you're stupid. Falcon 3, 152 with the remote KDU pad, it's the best ever. And I'm just like, okay. I mean, if you want to have a smartphone-sized device tethered to your radio and more cables and things that could go wrong when you're probably going to only have it on your assault net and talk to a dude 20 feet away from you, I mean, you do you, boo-boo. All right? So that concludes part one. You guys stand by for part two, where we are going to talk a little bit more about the buttonology on this, and then we'll get into hand mics and headsets and radio placement. This is Chuck from Press Check Training and Consulting, LLC. Peace.